They put him in handcuffs. Not a criminal, not a suspect, not someone running from the law. A decorated police officer, in full uniform, badge gleaming on his chest, was forced to his knees on the side of the road, hands cuffed behind his back as passing cars slowed down to stare. People pulled out their phones. Witnesses gasped. And within hours, the footage would explode across every screen in America, sparking outrage that would shake an entire police department to its core. His name was Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a 14-year veteran of the Crestwood City Police Department, a man who had served his community through riots, floods, and crime spikes. He had commendations on his wall and the respect of every officer who worked beside him. But on that warm Tuesday afternoon in April, none of that mattered to the two officers who pulled him over. It started with a simple traffic stop on the highway just outside the city limits. Lieutenant Webb was driving home from a charity event in his personal vehicle, still wearing his department-issued uniform, badge clearly visible. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. He had done absolutely nothing wrong. But two officers from a neighboring jurisdiction, Officers Dale Pruitt and Kevin Harmon, decided to pull him over anyway. What happened next would change everything. The dash cam footage, later released to the public, tells the story with brutal clarity. Lieutenant Webb pulled over calmly, rolled down his window, and immediately identified himself. "I'm Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Crestwood PD," he said clearly, holding up his badge. "Is there a problem, officers?" But Pruitt and Harmon didn't care. They ordered him out of the vehicle. Webb complied slowly, carefully, hands visible, asking them to explain why he was being stopped. Instead of answering, Harmon grabbed his arm. Webb pulled back instinctively, startled by the sudden grab. That was all the excuse they needed. Within seconds, both officers were on him. They forced him against the hood of his own car, yanked his arms behind his back, and snapped on the handcuffs. A man with 14 years of service, a chest full of commendations, and a uniform that should have spoken for itself, treated like a criminal on the side of the road. "You need to calm down," Pruitt barked into the dashcam audio. "I am calm," Webb replied, his voice remarkably steady. "I am a police lieutenant. I have done nothing wrong. Why am I being detained?" No answer came. For 18 long minutes, Lieutenant Webb sat on the curb in handcuffs, in full uniform, as Pruitt and Harmon ran his ID through dispatch. The dispatcher came back immediately. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Crestwood PD, no warrants, no priors, decorated officer. A complete and total non-threat. They uncuffed him. No apology, no explanation. They handed him back his ID and told him he was free to go. But this was far from over. Lieutenant Webb sat in his car for a moment after the officers left. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that a man who had dedicated his life to the badge should never have to feel. He picked up his phone, and he made one call. He called his Chief Patricia Galloway of the Crestwood Police Department. He didn't shout. He didn't break down. He spoke clearly, professionally, and told her exactly what had happened. Chief Galloway listened without interrupting. When Webb finished, there was a pause on the line. "Marcus," she said quietly, "send me everything." Within the hour, Chief Galloway had obtained the dashcam footage, the radio logs, and the dispatch records. She watched the footage herself, twice. Then she picked up her own phone and made a series of calls that would set an unstoppable chain of events into motion. She called the neighboring jurisdiction's chief of police. She called the mayor's office. She called the department's internal affairs division. And then, in a move that nobody expected, she called a press conference. The next morning, Chief Galloway stood at a podium in front of cameras from every major news outlet in the region. She did not hedge. She did not use cautious political language. She looked directly into the cameras and said, "What happened to Lieutenant Webb was wrong. It was an abuse of authority. It was racially motivated, and it will not be tolerated." The room erupted. The investigation was swift, brutally, decisively swift. Internal affairs from both departments launched a joint review. The dashcam footage was analyzed frame by frame, radio communications were transcribed and scrutinized, and interviews were conducted with witnesses who had stopped on the side of the road with the dispatch officer who had cleared Webb's name within minutes, and with colleagues who came forward to describe a pattern of behavior from officers. Pruitt and Harmon. It turned out this was not the first time. 3 previous complaints had been filed against Pruitt over the past 2 years, all involving Black and Latino drivers being stopped without probable cause. 2 of those complaints had been quietly buried in paperwork. One had resulted in a written warning that never made it into his permanent file. Harmon had 2 similar complaints, and their supervising sergeant, the man responsible for reviewing those complaints, had signed off on clearing both officers, both times. Now, under the white-hot glare of public attention and a chief who demanded accountability, there was nowhere to hide. Within 10 days of the incident, the results came down. Officer Dale Pruitt, terminated. Officer Kevin Harmon, terminated. Supervising Sergeant Ronald Bast, demoted and suspended without pay, pending further review. The department's use of force policy was immediately overhauled. Mandatory bias training was ordered for all officers in the jurisdiction, and the mayor of the neighboring city issued a formal public apology, not just to Lieutenant Webb, but to every member of the community who had been failed by the officers sworn to protect them. Lieutenant Webb stood outside the courthouse when the Shihwad announcement was made. He didn't celebrate. He didn't pump his fist. He simply nodded, the quiet nod of a man who had fought for justice and watched it arrive. This story is about more than 2 officers who lost their jobs. It is about a system and what happens when someone refuses to let that system stay silent. Lieutenant Marcus Webb could have driven home that day and said nothing. He could have swallowed the humiliation, filed it away as just another painful chapter of his life, and moved on. Many people do exactly that because they don't believe anything will change, because they've been told in 100 different ways that their voice doesn't matter enough to change the outcome. But Webb made the call, and Chief Galloway answered it, not with excuses, not with damage control, but with action. That is the lesson at the heart of this story. Accountability is not automatic. It requires someone with the courage to speak up, someone with the power to listen, and a community paying close enough attention to demand better. Lieutenant Webb returned to duty the following week. His colleagues greeted him with a standing ovation. He shook every hand, thanked every officer, and then went to work, because that is what he has always done. But something had changed. The dash-cam footage of his arrest had been viewed over 40 million times. Conversations were happening in living rooms, in police departments, in city halls across the country. Reform advocates cited the case. Legal experts cited it. Police chiefs in other jurisdictions reviewed their own complaint policies because of it. 1 man, 1 phone call, 10 days. Justice. It doesn't always work this fast, and it doesn't always work at all. But this time, because of courage, accountability, and a refusal to be silent, it did, and that matters. That matters more than we can measure.